Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar, Innovating for Employment Success. My name is Greg Lockwood and I'm Stakeholder Coordinator at the BC Centre for Employment Excellence. For those of you who are not familiar with the Centre, it was created in 2012 with funding from the provincial and federal governments to act as a research and knowledge sharing organization for BC employment service providers and employers. The Centre's mandate is not only to do innovative research, but also to find ways to share best practices with BC practitioners and employers and better integrate evidence into practice. We created this webinar series as a way to reach out and connect with practitioners. And through this series, we have highlighted new research by the Centre, but also are tapping into the knowledge and expertise within the employment services community. You are invited to view the video recordings of previous webinars that we have posted on our website. Today's webinar showcases the Innovating for Employment Success project, or IES, and its impact on internationally trained professionals, ITPs. IES was a demonstration project implemented by Mosaic from February 2015 to December 2016 and funded by the Ministry of Social Development and Social Innovation's Research and Innovation Fund. IES tested whether or not training ITPs in design thinking could reduce the lengthy labor market transitions they face in BC and help them to attach to jobs that were matched to their pre-arrival skills and experience. To tell us more about this innovative project, we are thrilled to welcome the Ies Project Team. First, we have Joan Anderson, who is the Director of Employment and Language Services at Mosaic, a multilingual, multi-service provider in Metro Vancouver that empowers newcomers and facilitates their meaningful participation in Canadian society. Mosaic has a long history of working with ITPs through, among other programs, the Skills Connect for Immigrants program and the Employment program at BC. Joan was one of the creators of the IES project and directed its implementation. She has a Master's of Industrial Relations from the University of Toronto and a Master's of Library Science from UBC. Next we have Natasha Bailey, who is a researcher, coach, and organizational development consultant who has been working in the nonprofit sector since the start of her career 16 years ago. Her work is focused on developing and implementing innovative processes in a range of contexts, including evaluation framework development, quality assurance benchmarking, and funding proposal development. She also leads research projects on a regular basis, emphasizing participatory action research methods. Natasha was the lead researcher on the IES project. And finally, we have Marina Gehrman, who is the coordinator of 2 of the new Career Paths for Skilled Immigrants programs at Mosaic and was the coordinator of IES. She holds a bachelor's degree in international relations and has several years' experience coordinating projects in both private and nonprofit sectors, from initiation and planning stages to implementation, monitoring, evaluation, and completion. Today's presentation will last 45 minutes, leaving some time for questions and discussion. You are encouraged to submit questions and comments to our presenters in the questions feature of your panel. We will address questions near the end of the presentation. We will be showing a video at the end of near the end of the presentation, and for most of you, those of you who are using a PC, you should be able to see the video and hear the audio. For those of you on a Mac, you might only be able to hear the audio. It's about a 6-minute video, so if you're on a Mac and you can only hear the video, we apologize in advance, and hopefully still hearing the audio will provide some further insight into the project. We also have a remote card or live closed captioning now available during the Centre's webinars, and you can find a link to that service in the reminder email that was sent out this morning and yesterday. And with that, it is my pleasure to hand over the microphone to Joan.
Thank you, Greg. And thanks, everybody, for joining us this afternoon. Just to review in brief the research question that we were tackling with Innovating for Employment Success. And that was, if internationally trained professionals, or ITPs, are trained in design thinking and then apply those skills in teams to solve a real-life employer-partner problem, does it increase their employment readiness, give them some needed labor market skills, and ultimately help them to gain employment that is more aligned to their pre-arrival skills and experience? And the types of labor market skills I'm referring to here are things such as innovation, communication, leadership, and teamwork. And the focus today will be less on the research activities that were carried out and more on the lessons that can be drawn from the implementation of the project for providing employment services to this particular group. If you have questions about the research activities, please don't hesitate to ask them at the end of the webinar. So just a little bit of an outline of what we're going to go through. We'll start with the rationale and how we implemented the project, and then move into the assessments that we use to measure impact. We thought it would be interesting for you to hear about these assessments because we know you're working with clients and you're curious about the use of various assessments and how they can support your work. We'll also talk about the impact of the program and how we engaged employers. We know that employer engagement is a priority for many of you, and so we wanted to focus on the lessons learned from this program, both for engaging employers and for employment services to this population in general. And of course, there's the time at the end for questions and comments. Before we get into the meat of it, we thought we'd do a quick poll question. And the question is, have you heard about design thinking? And your options are 3. They're up on the slide there. So answer A if yes, you have heard of design thinking, but you just basically know the title and you don't know much about the approach. Select B if you know about design thinking and what the approach involves. And then C if you haven't heard of the title at all or what the approach entails. And we will pause for a minute while you vote. I should say while you're voting that the idea for this project actually came from an immigrant professional himself who is an expert in design thinking. He approached Mosaic and said, how about trying this out for employment services? You know, I'd like to see this, see if this will work and if it will really, if internationally trained professionals will be able to increase their employability through using a design thinking approach. And we looked at it for a few months and thought, yes, there's merit to it. So we went ahead and did it. So thanks to Oscar for bringing that forward to us.
Excellent. Well, it's Greg here. I'm just going to jump in with the results because our team here isn't able to see them on the screen in our boardroom. And I'm not sure if this would be a surprise to the team, but with 70 or so % voted, voting, we have 14% choosing A, 14% choosing B, but a large majority of 71% choosing C.
Oh, fantastic.
Never having heard of the approach.
Well, that's great. You'll at least learn about design thinking today. And I'll call on Natasha in a minute to explain to you what we understand the term design thinking to be and how it's been used by other organizations. But first of all, why do we do this? And as an immigrant serving organization, Mosaic is always looking for different ways to address the barriers that internationally trained professionals face and that result in the dystopic situation that's set out in the quote on the slide from Fuller and Martin. To summarize, ITPs in Canada are underemployed and overqualified. Their credentials, education, and experience are not often recognized. This has a significant negative impact on the economy, and I'm sorry to say we have not been making much progress in this regard. And why use design thinking? And why do we think it could potentially make a difference? Well, 2 reasons really. Design thinking is aimed at addressing tough or what they call wicked problems, and we certainly thought this was one of them. And secondly, design thinking is an innovation-related skill, and we know that innovation is something that employers are becoming more and more interested in. So to tell you more about design thinking, I'm going to turn it over to Natasha.
Thanks, Joan. Okay, so what is design thinking all about? Well, you can see on the slide, and I'll come to it now in a second, a range of consumer products that have been developed using a design thinking approach. I'll run through them now in a minute. What is design thinking? it is meant to be an innovative problem-solving process that is increasingly part of business school curriculum and the toolkits for a range of sectors. So I certainly know that there's an organization called IDEO, they're a social enterprise, and they actually use design thinking to create products and services that improve the lives of people living in poverty. So for those of us working in nonprofits, design thinking is also a set of skills that's becoming more prominent. Basically, design thinking is a way of accelerating the production of prototypes for services and products that emphasize a really deep insight of the end user, the client, or the customer. So multidisciplinary teams come together and they collaborate and they use a variety of methods in this toolkit to really dig deep into the user's experience. So the kind of methods that you might hear of as part of a design thinking approach might be something like user interviews, something called point of view analogy, journey mapping, ranking, user-driven prototypes, and user observation. And what happens is that these methods really allow development of solutions that are creative and highly responsive to user needs. So you can see on the slide a small sample of the kind of products that have been created using this approach. So the iPhone, the iPad, the Apple Watch, the MacBook, and also the Starbucks loyalty program. They were all created using design thinking. And so the key thing about design thinking and ITPs, just to reiterate, is that if we trained ITPs in this approach, it would give them a set of skills that are valued in the BC labour market because there are companies out there that are looking for these skills. Many companies these days have innovation as a core business strategy or competence. So that's it. I'm going to turn over now to Marina, who's going to talk a little bit about implementation.
Thank you, Natasha. So just a reminder, all the clients were also, all the 80 clients were also in typical case managed services at their local work BC centers, in addition to participating in the project, as the project sought to assess if this approach could enhance EPBC service provision. Just to take a look at the program breakdown, in week number 1, participants were learning about workplace communication, also presentation and teamwork skills. In week number 2 and 3, they really focused on design thinking approach and methods. They also had meetings with employers. Every cohort had 2 meetings with employers, and they also worked on solution design and presentation to employers about the solution that they have developed. And in the week number 4, it was called Next Steps, and this is the week where participants really learn to apply design thinking skills to their job search. They also learn how to leverage and highlight the skills developed for their own job search, and also strengthen job search tools and strategies. So if we take a look at the IES participants, most of them were between the ages 30 and 50. Most came to Canada as skilled workers. 53% were in Canada for less than 2 years. Very interesting, 55% of our participants had held senior positions in their home countries, with 46 of them had master's degrees and up. Some of them were PhDs. And the main occupations of our sample were engineers, business development professionals, HR professionals, and accountants. In terms of statistics, 37 out of 40 completed the program. Natasha?
Thanks, Marina. So we thought it would be interesting today to review the kinds of inventories or assessments that were used to measure the impact of the program, because we thought there might be some utility for practitioners hearing about them. We'd be interested in hearing from people listening today whether or not they've used these assessments and the utility of them in delivery of services. So there were 3 different assessments that were used to measure impact for this project, and the first one that was used was the Employment Readiness Scale. You may be familiar with this one because I know some work PC centers are using it, particularly I think because it helps with the MD&A around when somebody starts, where they're at in terms of their employment readiness. And so what happened in this particular project is people did the ERS at the start, pre the intervention, and then post immediately after to see whether or not the training had an impact on their employment readiness in Canada. So what you can see there is the dimensions that the Employment Readiness Scale measures. I won't read them all out, but there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 dimensions there that add up to employment readiness. And when somebody does the assessment, it tells you whether or not they're self-sufficient or not sufficient in the dimensions. And then you can aggregate scores then to find out whether somebody is not ready, minimally ready, or fully ready for employment in Canada. So what's interesting in terms of the validity of this tool is that if you're deemed to be fully ready for employment, usually in about 79.2% of cases, clients will be employed within 12 weeks. Okay, and I suppose the value of this particular tool is that you can take it many times, and it can be used for action planning. We'll tell you a little bit more about what happened in terms of the impact in relation to employment readiness with this particular project in a minute, but I just want to finish going through the tools. So the other one that was used, this is just a smaller inventory and you may already be familiar with it, was the Job Search Self-Efficacy Scale from Zikic and Sachs, which is a 10-item inventory. But the utility of this particular assessment is that what it does is it looks at investigating participant confidence to enact a job search. So it's not just if they know how to conduct one, but whether or not they've got the confidence to actually carry it out. And so it does ask in relation to each item, how confident are you in relation to this? It's a good predictor of intention to carry out job search and the actual behaviors that somebody will be engaged, that the client will engage in. So say you've got a client who's saying that their confidence generally is low or their language confidence is low around job search. You could potentially use this particular assessment to see where they're at, and then you could in their action plan ask them to do some work around some of those items, and then you could retest them to see whether or not they're able to actually carry out those job search tasks on their own. The third assessment that was used to measure impact in this particular project was something called the MDQN, which is a reliable inventory for measuring a set of management and professional competencies that are lauded in the labor market today. And because this project was focused on ITPs, we needed a tool that was focused on measuring professional skills. So what happens is you've got 20 different competencies that are divided into 5 meta competencies. Okay, you can see 4 of them up there. And basically what was explored in this particular project was an increase in leadership, which is in the results orientation and leadership meta competency. Wanted to see if there was an increase in innovation skills as a result of the project, which was in the managing change meta competency, and also communication, which is in the interpersonal skills meta competency. Although we did look at the results across all the competencies to see if anything came up in terms of impact. This is a useful assessment for ITPs who may think that their management skills are where they need to be for the Canadian labour market, but potentially the practitioner isn't quite sure about that and either wants to validate that or have an objective means to communicate with the client about that. Because an interesting finding for this research was that when you look at the mean scores for participants in relation to these competencies, they're below the Canadian mean. So, yeah. It could be interesting in that context then for practitioners. High scores in relation to particular competencies as well could be used in client self-marketing to employers or in job development, just as another way to use the inventory. So we wanted to ask you another poll in relation to these assessments, just to get you thinking a little bit about their relevance for this particular project. So we wanted to ask you to answer this question. Which of the dimensions or skills measured do you think IES would have had the largest predictive impact on? So when I say predictive impact, I mean that when you statistically analyze the data, you can see that any increase in relation to these inventories is due directly to the design thinking training that they did. So you can choose from that range of answers there. Employment readiness, job search self-efficacy, or management competencies. So which do you think that this project had the most predictive impact on?
Okay, it's Greg again here with the results, and this time I was able to share the results, so hopefully you can see them on your screen, and sharing them here with the team as well. The majority chose employment readiness as what they thought would have the most predictive impact, 53%. And then it was 27% for job search self-efficacy, and finally 20% thinking it would be management competencies.
Great. Thanks, Greg. So I suppose you'll find out now in a couple of slides what the actual impact of the project was. But before we get to that, and you can see whether or not you chose the one that had the most predictive impact, Marina's going to talk a little bit about employer engagement for this project.
So let's take a look at what did participants actually do in the project. And as you can see from the pictures, they were very engaged, very busy, and happy. So Mosaic consulted with employers to identify non-critical business problems using the following criteria. Something that needed to be solved that could benefit from fresh eyes, or that had been around for a while and the employer didn't have the resources or the time to focus on. And the slide shows participants working on the challenges. And some of those challenges were new internet file structure. Another one was promoting internal training, fostering diversity and learning about best practices in the workplace, improving customer experience at the front desk, and enhancing promotional materials. Employer engagement comprised of conversations with Mosaic to identify the problem, an initial meeting, interview with their innovation team. Also, employers were available to answer any questions or provide any background information throughout the process. And a final presentation where participants had a chance to present their solutions to the employer team. And the employer staff commitment was around 5 hours per employer. Very interesting, all employers said that they would participate again. They indicated that they were going to use some of the recommendations made and reported that they would value interacting more frequently with participants during the solution design process. So more than 5 hours they were allocated. Some of the employers that we worked with, all of them actually, was Zaber, Camp Pacific, C-SPAN, Sinclair Dental, and we worked with the City of Vancouver Engineering Department and Diversity Services. And here's what we learned from this experience. First of all, take the stance that the client can help the employer by bringing fresh eyes and a wealth of experience. It is not about the employer helping the poor client, but the client helping the employer. Also, at the earliest opportunity, tell the employer a story about the client. Maybe about a project the client was very proud of, a key workplace success, or an innovative solution that they developed. So let that be the front edge of the engagement, not just the fact that the employer, that the client needs a job desperately. Another lesson was draw out the challenges that employers are facing and show how the client can address them. Know the demand shortages that are facing employers at a sectoral level in the local area and demonstrate your awareness of these challenges. Last, meet with employers in person, mirror their communication style and workplace norms, and take a recruiter stance for ITPs that may be more of a typical corporate approach.
So now to look at the impact that this project actually had on our test group. And for those of you who voted that the positive impact on employment readiness was the biggest impact, ding, 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 5 stars. You're right. That was the area in which this project had the most impact. But overall, the project had a positive impact on the test group compared with those in control, who were only receiving regular EPBC services in terms of all 3 of the major areas we assessed: employment readiness, job search self-efficacy, and management competencies. But the most impact was on employment readiness. Using the employment readiness scale, we found that 46% of the test group increased their readiness compared to 19% of the control group. So quite a dramatic difference, which led us to explore further and learn that the test group was 3.6 times more likely to be employment ready as a result, a direct correlation to the training provided. In terms of management competencies, the impact that was found to be significant, statistically, not surprisingly, was on innovation skills. And we'll get to the impact on job search self-efficacy in the next slide. In terms of the impact we were hoping to have on commensurate employment, at the 12-month follow-up, the test group was slightly ahead of control in terms of finding commensurate employment, although the training was not predictive of that. Of note is that we decided to analyze both test and control on all those that were in did not get commensurate employment to see if there was anything we could learn about whether they had anything in common. And interestingly enough, we found that there were some statistically significant characteristics of those who did not get commensurate employment. They were generally older, over 40 years of age, had been in the country longer, more than 3.5 years, and were more likely to belong to a visible minority group. Now, looking at the impact on the job search self-efficacy of the IES program, the chart on this page shows a positive impact on that scale. You can see that the average change for individuals in relationship to the job search self-efficacy measure was higher for the test group, which is on the right in this slide, than for control, although it was not predictive of the change. Overall, there was a greater average increase for the test group in 7 out of the 10 items in the job search self-efficacy scale. Qualitatively, we received lots of different kinds of feedback from the participants about the impact on job search. We did 10 in-depth interviews with 10 participants. Participant 9, for example, described how the program impacted his motivation. Quote, just that the program gave me many motivation in different ways, just the confidence in myself and ideas like interviewing structure and resume. And participant 4 said, I understood that networking is a very complicated process. It's not just being in contact with one person. It was a very good result for me that you have to be in different people, in different process, with different relationships. It was not so easy. And one of the things that the person who suggested this program to us wanted to achieve was treating the internationally trained professionals as consultants, as people with a tremendous amount of experience, knowledge, education to contribute to employers. And I think that was achieved, and you can see that in the results of some of the that I've been sharing with you today. In terms of lessons for employment services, Natasha will address that.
Thanks, Joan. So Mosaic wanted to highlight 3 key lessons from the implementation of this particular project, and I'm just going to run through those now. What's the learning then for employment services from this? I suppose one of the main unanticipated qualitative impacts of IES, so when I say qualitative, I mean that participants reported it themselves in evaluation feedback forms from training and from in-depth interviews that were carried out, was this chance for participants to gain team working skills in a way that they knew was really reflective of the Canadian workplace. Participants were really clear that they knew that working in the Canadian work environment involved being in contact and working productively with multicultural teams with lots of cultural diversity, and they really wanted the chance to experience that, learn that, and be able, I suppose, to say to future employers that they had done that and that they were prepared for the Canadian work environment in that way. They perceived that they would not have been able to get that type of experience through traditional employment services. Okay. So I suppose the lesson is that employment services could think about how they can design interventions so that ITPs get the chance to develop their cultural intelligence and teamwork skills through multicultural group work. All right. I think what's key about multicultural teams is that it also allows participants to foster pride and confidence in their own culturally specific knowledge, which does 2 things. One is that it instills confidence, which is really important because as an ITP, when you come and you experience the transition penalty here in the labor market, obviously your confidence decreases. So when your own cultural knowledge is used in a productive fashion, it increases confidence. And it allows this cultural origin knowledge to contribute positively to the design thinking process as well, which is also key. The second lesson for employment services then that Mosaic wants to highlight is this employer enthusiasm for the problem-solving approach, whether it's design thinking or not. The notion of going to employers and saying, hey, have you got a problem that we could solve, made the Mosaic thought that the employer engagement an easier venture than they originally thought it might be. And so it's just employment services could think how they might integrate a problem-solving approach through their employer engagement or their job development. Key informants who were interviewed for the evaluation of the project, they said that it could be important to target businesses that have innovation as a core strategy or value as well, and when you're thinking about using a problem-solving approach. That last bullet there then harkens back to what Joan was saying around who is it that is experiencing the most barriers to the labor market within this particular cohort. And it was around older clients, those from visible minority groups, and those who'd been longer in country. So, all of the research talks about how early support is better. And you can see from this particular cohort how if you were longer in country, then that made it more difficult to find commensurate employment. So I guess it's just to keep putting that message out there, this research validates those barriers, but also that those kind of clients will need extra supports. I suppose further participants in this project expressed strong support for employment services that were tailored to their needs. So these particular barriers just give you a bit more of a sense of the needs of this client group. Mosaic would welcome your reflections or ideas in relation to the integration of these lessons into employment services during the Q&A. But now I'll turn over to Marina.
Thank you, Natasha. We are going to conclude by showing an excerpt from a video we did on the IES program, putting some faces and voices into the program. And we'll start with hearing from some of the employers involved in the project, and then move into hearing from the participants in our first test group. The video is going to run for about 6 minutes, and after the video we would be happy to take your questions and listen to any other comments that you have.
We're quite impressed because you guys came here for 1 hour asking questions and understanding our true problems, and went back and within 2 weeks you guys came up with not only presentations and great suggestions and solutions, and also built that prototype. We know how hard it is, so you guys work really hard. So I'm really impressed with that.
I thought it was very useful. I was surprised. Like I mentioned in the presentation, only about an hour of our time, with a bit of time spent on answering follow-up questions, how they were able to take that and get into quite a bit of detail on particular subjects. Double diamond process, as we call it, the design thinking. It was interesting seeing them take the content and information we were able to provide, work collaboratively, put sticky notes, and build that kind of collaboration and innovation in terms of their thought process, which ultimately articulated a nicely presented presentation of the thoughts and recommendations. So yeah, I think it's really valuable. I would recommend it.
I think there was a lot of value to both sides. The participants in the program, I believe, they got exposure to our issues or the problems that we are grappling with. And we were able to share that information with the participants, and they went away and they used their brain power and they came up with fantastic ideas. They're very, very creative. That was great. I was really impressed with the app because that is something I can see happening here.
I thought the participants pay a lot of attention and care to what they're doing. They seem engaged in the process. I've definitely been impressed with the presentations that the 2 groups I work with presented. Definitely being involved in these presentations when, obviously they're going to point out shortcomings of the company, so if anything, it's taught me to be patient and stay calm. Which I think is important. You're not always going to like what you hear, and if they're just only telling me what I wanted to hear, I don't think they'd be doing their job. And I think they've mostly shown some courage by coming here and saying, oh, I think you should do this, I think you should do that, even knowing it could be hard for me to hear it. No, just I enjoyed the whole process. It's been good. Yeah.
I would say not just useful, I would highly recommend this. Recommend that the government adopt this program. The concept itself, I think it will help certainly the immigrants, the new immigrants like me, in adjusting easily to the labor market.
It's a great experience. I think that you get to work with companies, real companies, and with real cases, real needs. And also you get to work with team members and people in the same group. And you learn, to create the team environment, which is excellent, which is really wonderful. And then you can use that skill later on in the workforce.
And the main advantage of this program is that everybody is connected to a real-world company project. So I recommend it to people who want to have a real-world problem-solving experience.
I think it's a very significant program, given the fact that most of the newcomers in Canada face the challenge of acquiring their initial Canadian work experience. And this program really helps them to translate their skills into Canadian market, into Canadian context, right away once they go through this program.
Design thinking has really taught me how to think beyond your scope, and not necessarily that not to be caged in the profession you are in, but somehow to be interdisciplinary.
I learned so many stuff. I can say that it collects my knowledge from my backgrounds all together in one path.
The program is very good. I find it very useful. Despite I took some courses before, it's very useful for me. So I'm very glad to participate.
When I started here, I learned so many things I didn't know it before with my 23 years experience.
This program is very useful. It's because this is it's a new way to find the solutions, how to deal with the problems.
I thought this program gives me a lot of opportunity to experience real Canadian workplace.
When I first came in, I was this in the Philippines back home. And then when I came in, even if I can speak English, it's sort of like a different environment. So I felt insecure and then sort of like unhappy. And then I felt I cannot do a lot of things, So I think the most important part is to give back the self-confidence of people.
So I've got a few questions for the team. And you are also we want to remind you that you're very, very encouraged to send in your questions as well. We want to hear from you folks, especially with Natasha asking the question of how these employer engagement lessons could be incorporated into your services. I wanted to touch on more around the employer engagement because I think it's really interesting in the way that you kind of made the sell to employers. And I wanted to ask a little bit more about what approach you took, like the way that you approached employers about participating in this project. Was that something that was different in the way that you typically, I mean, it must be different because you're approaching them with a different kind of, intervention than typically what you would do. So did you kind of learn early on, or did you know going into this that it would really need to be kind of like, it's not so much about the charity of supporting like these ITPs, but really about what they can bring to the table and the way that they can problem solve, something that's a real issue at your organizations could save you time and money. So yeah, maybe Marina, you might be in the best position because you probably spoke with employers and worked with them on this. What was your experience in bringing employers in your approach into how to get them to come on board?
I think you mentioned correctly that that's the approach we took. We have very highly qualified consultants. I did build a lot on their experience and education. And we have this group of consultants. How often do you have 5 people, 3 of which have a PhD and 2 have a master's, and like, you know, a collective 35 years of experience, let's say, you know. How often do you have that kind of group come into your office and free of charge look at a problem that you've been maybe struggling for years and years, or you just didn't have the time to look into it? And how about they come in and generate some solutions for you on top of it using using the innovative approach of design thinking? And of course, when they hear that, they're like, oh, okay, so let us try. So I can't say it was difficult to commit employers.
Okay. And I mean, you listed the range of problems that employers were looking to solve, you know, all the way from very kind of technical, like folder structures I'm guessing that was maybe with the engineering department at City of Vancouver, or was that with CSPAN?
The folder structure was with the campus.
Oh, okay. All the way to more kind of like an HR diversity and inclusion type of project. So you said that some of these employers even implemented recommendations from the project teams.
Yes.
Like, are you able to share an example of how they used it, or you know, any comments from them about how it's made their lives easier at their company?
I remember when we went to City of Vancouver Engineering Department, the problem was how to enhance the customer service experience at their front desk. And our participants, some of them being engineers and working in this field, they designed a little, almost like a map of that area where people come in. Next time when we came with a presentation, we saw the tape. And they've already had that tape and how to direct people in a more efficient way and how to, you know. So to us, that was very exciting because we thought, oh, okay, you're already trying this out. Not that they haven't thought of it in the past, because a lot of this, I have to say, a lot of the employers were very, very amazed with the fact that these people only had 2 weeks and they were able to identify some solutions that these employers, it took them months or years to identify, and these people in like 1 meeting and 2 weeks and design thinking were able to identify the same solutions. Wow. So it was about that as well, you know, not just identifying something extremely new, because obviously they know the subject better.
Yeah.
But just coming to the same conclusions, for them it was mind-blowing.
Incredible. We do have a couple of questions coming in. So a couple of them are even I can answer these because it's about the final report and where to find it. I know from doing a little bit of background work and putting together the webinar, it is on the Mosaic website, so you can find it here. In fact, the slide should be up for you to see what link to go to look at the final research report. There's a question about, could you give us a specific example of what you did differently? So I'm not sure if that's enough to be able to kind of elaborate on, because I'm not sure if the comparison is differently from like what you typically do with EPBC or other programs, but if anyone wants to take a stab at that, what you did differently.
Well, I mean, I'll start. It's Joan here. I think right from the beginning, the framework was different. So instead of thinking of participants as being deficient in all of these different ways as job seekers in Canada, we looked at the participants as, Marina used the phrase, consultants, who had a great deal of expertise and intelligence to bring to problem solving. So we kind of flipped the model a bit on its head. So that was different, and we tried to maintain that all the way through the 4-week period. The other thing was we spent most of the first week just focusing on how do you work in multicultural teams and what are the expectations in the Canadian workplace. And we wouldn't normally spend that much time on those topics with that cohort. So, and a lot of it was actual, working on things before they got their project. And then, of course, we've never trained people in design thinking before. Oscar, who brought the idea to us, his firm provided the training. And then by identifying projects, so there were how many teams, Marina?
8.
8 teams, 4 and 4, right? Mm-hmm. So each team was working on a real world project where they got to go out to the employer and interview and gather information and then apply what they'd learned about how design thinking worked to solving that problem. And of course, in the process of solving that problem, they learned a whole whack of things about how to communicate with each other, how to work with Canadian employers, what the design thinking methodology is. All these things are things that we don't normally focus on. And then in the final week, what we tried to do, and I think, we learned a lot about trying, and the second cohort was probably more effective in this than the first one, was to say, okay, look at your job search from a design thinking perspective. Get creative about it. Try and figure out ways that you can, if you're stuck on something, use a design thinking approach to move through. Or if you've tried something 5 times and it's not working, then use what you've learned about innovative thinking to figure out why. So we tried to do the traditional sort of job search stuff from a different perspective and a different framework. I don't know, Natasha or Marina, do you want to add anything?
I think you covered it really well. It really depends what the question is, really focusing on. Like, what have we done differently with employers, with clients, with teaching,
Yeah. So if there's a follow-up question, just send it along to us.
Here's the additional resources slide. Someone was asking about that. So again, this will also, all of the slide deck, I'll share with you as well in the blog post. We don't have any other questions from participants. And I did want to ask, I think one more kind of question related to, I guess, to the research team. So I'll pose it to you, Natasha. Okay. Was there anything really surprising in terms of the findings? Like going into this intervention, you have probably some preconceived expectations about how things are going to go, but what was the thing that probably took you most by surprise?
I'm not allowed to have preconceived.
You're not supposed to, but we all do, I think.
Yes, this is true. I suppose there was a, in the outcomes, there was hopefully going to be an impact on other management competencies other than, the innovation was one, and that was fine. There was a predictive impact there, but we were also looking at communication and leadership and initiative, and there was no predictive impact around those competencies. Although what you could see is that when you look at the results, the test group, there was a positive trend for the test group in terms of their average increase around those competencies compared to control. So that was a positive trend that was interesting. I think probably the job search self-efficacy. Joan, you can comment around this if you want. That was a neat finding in terms of to see how the confidence had increased around job search. Just as a result of being involved in this particular engagement and interacting with employers in that way and being involved in those multicultural teams and thinking about their job search using a more kind of a design thinking approach. That was a finding of note.
Excellent.
Yeah. And I think as we hadn't predicted at the beginning that working in multicultural teams would have such a profound impact on the participants. And so we didn't actually discover it statistically, but qualitatively, almost every single participant said that they learned so much about working in teams and they would have liked to have learned more. And they were also very excited about being recognized as having unique cultural knowledge and experience that they could contribute. A lot of the participants came from countries that are not as diverse as Canada at all. And so this idea of working in multicultural teams was a new thing for them. And initially they were full of bravado. I mean, these are all people that are very accomplished in their home countries about, oh yeah, we can do that, no problem. And the longer they worked in teams, the more complicated they found it to be, and the more they wanted to learn about how to do it. So actually for the second test group, we rejigged some of our interventions so that we spent more time on the dynamics of teams and how to be a successful team.
Excellent. And one final note or question from a participant is asking, just before we wrap up here, where to find more information, more resources about design thinking. And you see the link here to IDEO.org, which has a ton of free, really informative and useful design thinking tools and resources. They have a whole field guide and a bunch of other really neat stuff if you want to get more into this type of approach.
And I would also say that one of the universities that has really championed this is Stanford. It's one of the leaders in North America really about design thinking. So if you go to Stanford University, or even if you just Google and look for the Stanford University's design thinking information, that's a really good source. UBC also has what they call, I believe, a D Studio, which is about design thinking, and the City of Vancouver collaborates with UBC and other universities to do a design thinking studio that gives them ideas about how to innovate in their services. So you'll be overwhelmed by choices, but what we've put up there, I think, is a good introduction, and then I would go to Stanford to get further into it.
I also have a book that I used quite a bit when I was initially looking at design thinking and trying to get a theoretical kind of understanding of what it was about. And it's by an author, well, it's edited by Thomas Lockwood, and it's called Design Thinking, Integrating Innovation, Customer Experience, and Brand Value. And it's quite interesting as well because it puts things into business cases and shows the application of the methodology to business cases.
So we have that resources slide back up there for you, and again, we'll have the file, the PDF file of these slides available for you to download as well. Okay, and we've wrapped up questions and discussion for this webinar, and I just want to thank everyone here on the Ies Project team for today's presentation, and thanks for everyone out there, for attending. So again, it was recorded, and we will post the video of the presentation on our website and send you all a link in an email within the next week. And as always, we welcome your input and feedback. So when you leave the webinar, you will be asked to complete a short survey. We would really appreciate it if you took a minute or two to share your thoughts. It will help us immensely in planning future events. We would also appreciate any suggestions you have for future webinar topics. Keep an eye on our website, newsletter, and follow-up email for more information and to register for the next webinar. So that ends our event today. On behalf of our presenters and my colleagues here at the Center, thanks for participating in today's discussion, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.